think it seems like most folks are back, so I'm gonna start moving forward. Um, so the next item on the agenda is the board discussion about the proposed outline and report. The outline was circulated as part of the materials for this meeting. Um, I don't know if Anna might have already dropped it in the chat. Yes, it's earlier up in the chat. One of the second link in the chat if folks need to pull it up. So I think this is, I don't know if the DOJ needed to say anything on this, but I think the outline is pretty self-explanatory and ties in closely to what folks raised already in their report backs from the subcommittees. So we could just dive into comments or questions on the outline if folks have any.
Board member Kajat. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
That's right. I'll go after you.
I just had one brief comment to start. As we've talked about expanding or changing the focus of some of the data analysis, there's also been the question of where DOJ analysis time, technical time can go. And I wanted to point out that under the general stop analysis, even though we want continuity from year to year, if the veil of darkness section, in fact, takes much more sort of overhead time to process and actually isn't illuminating so much for us, there's been a lot of back and forth about the value of that to begin with, then this may be a year where, in fact, we want to focus on other areas and remove the veil of darkness analysis. Right, that was my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's done every year, and it does seem to be a time-intensive and then also difficult to explain and interpret set of results. So maybe we can hear from the DOJ staff at some point whether they think that there's a lot of work and effort put into getting those tabs right. I wanted to ask a question about the humanizing stops section at the beginning. Is that going to be a qualitative section, or are DOJ staff going to go on ride-alongs or do something where they're going to just observe lots of stops and talk about what they say and do some sort of qualitative write-up?
Hi everyone, this is Allison. So I think the idea was not to do ride-alongs and things like that, but to do more research on, and perhaps interviews or, connecting with community members, connecting with, folks that you all may know, but really trying to get a sense of, the mental health impact of undergoing these stops. We know from past board reports that there are significant disparities in some of the stops. And so I know the board has been talking for several years about, trying to put a face to the data. And so I think it is qualitative, but more trying to understand the actual impacts of these stops and perhaps take a look at, when someone, what someone's experience may be going through the world, as a person of a certain identity or a certain race, and, what their sort of likelihood is to be stopped, to be searched, things like that, and then the actual impact of these searches on communities. And so I think, really trying to continue efforts. I know the board really liked last year some of the quotes and testimonials, and some of those came from surveys that organizations did, because we ourselves do not have the bandwidth to do a survey ourselves, but there are many organizations out there who do these surveys and who do take testimonials and who do talk to people about their experiences. And so continuing those efforts to really get different community perspectives on what these experiences are like for people, and also looking at, when there are intersectional identities, taking a look at what that, how that experience might be compounded, and might be, have different risk levels, based on what might have, in terms of what might happen in a stop. So I think that was the idea behind it, but making it, looking at research, looking at data on this, but having it be qualitative rather than, but perhaps including potentially a quantitative element just in the sense of, if I am certain identity, this might be, my experience in, going through a stop, for example. So it's continuing to essentially put a face to the data, and put a human face to the data, have it be realistic, and also look at the mental health impacts that some of these stops may have on different communities. And so, we know that, there are, as the data has shown, there are impacts on different communities. So, we know, for example, if someone is perceived as transgender and a transgender person of color, they are more likely to experience certain things when they encounter law enforcement officers. And what is the impact of that on their mental health, on, physical health, on community? And Tony, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, because Tony from our office is going to be taking a look at this.
I think that was pretty succinct. Thanks, Allison.
I had a question for Allison, sorry. My question is are you planning on taking into account in that analysis, which I think is great, the impact of kind of an over police presence as well? Because I think they're, because you're dealing with communities, different kind of communities, and in that you're dealing with communities that are predominantly communities of color. And so while there may be people who don't actually come into contact or get stopped by police, but the mere fact of seeing the over-policing and seeing the things happen, having an impact, is that any way, shape, or form going to be part of the analysis, or has that not come up?
So I can just briefly speak to that. I can just say that in sort of the lead up to these conversations, that certainly was one factor, a big factor. Just understanding, maybe historically and, even more so presently, that there is this notion, there is this understanding of communities certainly being over policed, and there is a response, that response oftentimes results in mental health traumas of sorts. And so there is an outcry from these communities about these sort of traumas, and reading more and more about it within the last 2, 3 to 4 years. I think that's sort of what stimulated some of the conversation to begin taking a look at these impacts, and to actually see if we can sort of measure or assess, and maybe most importantly begin really putting a face, a voice, and a sense of having a sense of where people are coming from when these interactions take place that lead to these traumas. So I think that, I think we did really spend some time taking a look at that, because I mean, it's apparent, it's in the news, it's important. And so, yeah, I think that is something, I think that's important. And I think that is an area that we will take a look at.
Anju, I'm not sure if I thought I saw your hand raised a moment ago.
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to raise and ask the question if we might be able in the upcoming report to look at and provide analysis on profiling issues related to Muslim, South Asian, and Sikh communities. I had first raised this when I joined the board in August of 2021. It was right on the heels of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And unfortunately, there wasn't time and opportunity to do that. Under the category of better late than never, I would suggest doing that now. We know there's been quite significant evidence of that type of profiling and surveillance by a number of law enforcement agencies across the country in the 20-year period since 9/11, and that much, if not all of it, was based on identity and religion, and I guess in some ways race as well. And so that would be my strong recommendation, to somehow incorporate that into this upcoming report, and I'm happy to help in making that happen. And the only other thing I wanted to say is, if there are folks from DOJ who have comments on or feedback on how this might happen, any challenges with it, what the process would be to undertake it, either during this meeting or future meetings, I'd welcome that.
Andrea? All right. Well, actually, I don't know if any from DOJ wanted to directly respond to Manju's comments, and then go to Andrea.
So, hey Manju, it's Nancy. So I think we're talking about identity demographics on our outline, and we can certainly, and Kevin's available to answer questions as well. We can certainly look at different impacts on Middle Eastern individuals and Asian individuals, but we do not collect religion as a demographic. And so that is just one caveat I just wanted to point out. Kevin?
Yeah, Nancy, I think I was thinking about the same thing that you just went over there, is that we have information about race and ethnicity that includes Middle Eastern or South Asian as a perception group for that identity type. However, we do not collect information surrounding officer perceptions about someone's religious beliefs or practices. And so, trying to look into specific subgroups of individuals who may be Muslim or Sikh would be difficult if we're speaking about them, based on those beliefs, because we don't capture that within the data. If we want to generalize analyses that are just like breaking down the data and breaking out the Middle Eastern South Asian individual group, we could do that with the race data, but I don't want to communicate that as being equivalent to, looking at someone's religious beliefs, because they're not the same. There's overlap between those two groups, right? But they're not the same, and I would caution us from implying that they are. And so that's just a limitation that we have with the way that the data are collected. But if there's a desire to do some specific analyses, then we're open to hearing what those are. But that's all I have on that.
If I might respond, I certainly understand that, and I think by taking an initial review of the data, we could look at what it tells us. Absolutely true that one is not a full marker of the other, but it might give us the beginnings of an understanding of what has happened to Muslim, South Asian, Sikh, and Middle Eastern communities. So under sort of the overall framework of a MEMSA or MASA, and certainly those were all communities that unfortunately have been targeted by biased law enforcement actions over the last 2 decades.
Andrea?
Yes, I would echo Board Member Kulkarni's recommendation, and I'm just recalling the data from at least 2 years ago. I can't remember if this was reflected in this past report, but I remember looking at I think Wave 1 and Wave 2 agency disparities with regard to stops in the Middle Eastern community in particular. And, so these are the Wave 1, Wave 2 were the bigger cities. And it was striking, right? And it raised a lot of questions that we didn't focus on in our report. And I think it would be worth looking more deeply at that data in the aggregate for the state, but I think also looking at it where we see, significant populations of MEMSA or MASA communities, I think is important.
Thank you, Andrea. And I'll just jump into with my kind of comments on the outline. First, to Manju's point, I think I would also endorse that doing what we can with the data, even if we can't go as far as we'd like to, and maybe also, given that the data that we'll be reviewing this year actually does include the anniversary of 9/11, that might be an interesting thing to look if there's any rise in the inaction around that time period, if that's possible, and also maybe, if given the limitations of the data, being more explicit and trying to include some of that in the impact of some of those voices in the humanizing the data portion, like how has that affected people's even willingness to practice their own beliefs, given that how they might be targeted, et cetera. So maybe being conscious effort to include that in that discussion would be helpful. Agree also on the removal of the veil of darkness. I think even 2 years ago, it was the report noted we're only including this because we said we would, and then it's gotten even less value. Well, there's been continuing questions of its value, so I think I agree that that's a good way to free up some space, unless there's a really, unless it's a really low resource intensive kind of analysis. On the civilian complaints piece, again, I've been hounding on this for quite a while, but the definition of profiling, the fact that agencies are not using the actual correct definition of profiling is absolutely impacting this data. Even in the conversation that we had earlier, saying like relying just on race as a basis to stop someone is wrong. That is not the definition of profiling under the law. It's the consideration of or reliance on, to any degree, actual perceived race or identity characteristics in deciding who to stop, or deciding upon the scope or substance of law enforcement activities following a stop. So it's much broader than just, I have no other reason to stop you, I'm going to stop you because you're a part of this identity group. And I think I hear that wrong definition regularly from agencies. I heard it in the train the trainer training curriculum. That's not what the law says. And so I think we need to explicitly address this in the civilian complaint portion, either whether it's looking back at policies and actually seeing if they tick off all the boxes that are required element of the definition of profiling as the law sets it forth, or at minimum, articulating that many agencies do not incorporate that into their definition, and be clear that that is probably impacting whether or not these complaints are sustained because they're being compared to the agency policy, which is not necessarily accurate currently. But that absolutely needs to be addressed, and I don't think we can just ignore that mismatch because that is something that is absolutely driving agencies' actions on the street and institutional responses to those actions because it is conforming to their own policies. One additional thing that I wanted to include, which I mentioned in the report back, but it's not in the outline on the post section, is that the data collection piece around posts, and maybe we can think through in conversations with DOJ ways to kind of elicit public feedback in terms of how they are engaging with posts and what that experience has been like, and agencies as well, and just try to figure out what kind of data collection would be useful. If we're able to collect that, that would be great to include in the outline, particularly as post is being continuously looked at for implementation of more and more elements of racial justice within the legislature, or the decertification process and how that is rolling out. So I think it's important to understand more about that agency. And then the last piece is, again, I think I raised this before, if we can incorporate anything about kind of the value of the RIPA data, just examples anecdotally about like how it's been used over the past years since it's started being collected. Things have already come up in this conversation, whether it's police agencies changing their own policies, whether it's reports coming out that have kind of forced other entities to take action. I think it's really important, particularly when there's like bills pending that would take away some of the data that RIPA is even collecting. It shows, I think there's a need to really demonstrate the importance of this data collection and how it's impacting the public. And we can figure out a way to collect that. I know doing like a formal survey with the agencies is really time intensive for DOJ, but I think maybe just sending out an inquiry to the agencies, and those that respond, and we can potentially include them and not worry about like really tracking them down, because it's not going to be like a universe. It's just kind of anecdotal. That might be a way. Also soliciting input from the public through board members or through other ways to flag uses of the data. I know one of the I think Michelle mentioned already Oakland, Berkeley, and Culver City incorporating this into some of their policies. So I think the public is also aware of things that we could also just highlight to really demonstrate the value of this data. And I really did like the suggestion of looking at kind of the impact of some policy changes on the data, on bias outcomes. I'm not sure exactly how to make that feasible in the data, but if we can even at least think through it, if not for this year, then next year, when maybe there's more data present, I think that'd be a fantastic next step. So those are my comments. Did anyone else have additional comments?
Board Member LaWanda, I have comments regarding the data. What time period are we looking at? Because of that COVID time, some of the data may not be as accurate as it should be because of COVID and how things were shut down and how some people were not able to make reports because some places weren't open. So what time period are we looking at for wave 1, 2, and 3?
So the most recent year of RIPA data that will be available for analysis in this upcoming report will be data collected during the calendar year of 2021. So last year, the report that just came out in the beginning of this year, right, January 1, 2022, was looking at 2020 RIPA data primarily, which was peak shutdowns. Not that there weren't things going on in 2021 as well. We all know, we all lived through that. It was still a pandemic at that point, but we just did get out of a reporting period where we were examining probably the peak pandemic period, and so we're looking at a period of time that's still occurring during the pandemic, but in 2021, kind of 9 months or so in. So that is going to be the most current data for evaluation in this upcoming year's report.
Okay, only reason I question, because 2020 and 2021, due to COVID, the public did not have access to law enforcement like in the past, where you were able to go into a station and file a complaint. The stations were closed. So, yeah, 2020 and 2021, the stations were closed here in LA County. You didn't have access to walk in. You had to have a phone, and if you didn't have a cell phone, you weren't able to say anything.
Yeah, that's definitely the case in many areas. I mean, luckily, the analyses that we're performing are on RIPA data, right? Not to say that doesn't affect communities or their access to law enforcement, right? But RIPA data are collected on stops, detentions, rather than collecting data on crime reports, so, people's ability to go in and request services from, say, a substation for a police or sheriff's department. It's about the data are collected on actual interactions and detentions between law enforcement and the people that they stop. And so we're not capturing within the RIPA data times where people are going in to make a crime report in person. And so that wouldn't show up as much in the RIPA data, but that's absolutely the case during this time period.
Oh, Kevin, I'm sorry. I'm not saying I'm going in, but it would have been less people out on the streets. That's what I meant. Because of the COVID, it would have been less people on the streets because a lot of people were there would have been less people on the streets. That's what I meant to say.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was likely the case during a lot of places during this time period. We observed, a steep decline in the raw number of stops that occurred in 2020 when comparing that with 2019 before. And I imagine that we'll also see, lower stop numbers in 2021 than we would have seen from these agencies back before COVID. The pandemic absolutely has affected a lot of aspects of people's lives, including how often they're out on the street and police activity.
Hi, all. I did just want to respond briefly to Melanie's comments about perhaps doing a survey and see how agencies are using the data. We did discuss this with Andrea at our meeting for the policies subcommittee, but what DOJ reviewed the survey that we did, because the last survey we did was in 2020, and that contained questions about how they are using the different, how they're using the data analysis, what they're doing with it, et cetera. And so out of that came the idea for, and we thought it might be something the full board would be interested in and not just the policy subcommittee, but perhaps setting up a presentation for all of you from an agency that we know is using the data to do their own analysis, a nonprofit or community organization that is using the data, and then an academic or researcher. And we can find out, because we essentially have that information from the survey we did in 2020. It's not, the info we have from the survey is not very detailed, but we do know from it at least the agencies that are doing particular analysis and using that analysis within the agency. So we can set up a presentation for all of you so all of you can hear in more detail and ask questions and get a sense of how different stakeholders might be using the data. So I wanted to bring that up because, I'm not sure that doing another survey would bring us more information than what we got from the 2020 survey. And if we did do a survey, then that might take away resources from us doing something else for the report. So we did have the idea of using the data that and information we already have from the 2020 survey that we all did to then set up and connect all of you with folks who are actually using this RIPA data, finding out in more detail what they're doing with it and how they're using it. So we are going, so that's it. So our idea, if you all do, express an interest and agree with this, would be to set something up for the next full board meeting where we can have, let's say, an agency, a community organization, or advocacy organization, and academic or researcher, and how they're looking at the RIPA data specifically and what they're doing and how they're using it, not just what they're doing with it, but then what sort of results or measures or outcomes does that have?
I'll just respond briefly, just since it's a response to kind of the idea. I think that, that might be interesting, but I think I was thinking of it to serve a kind of different function, and that's kind of to demonstrate to folks who look at the report and kind of have a place where we can point to that, like, this is useful, and it's helping agencies move forward, it's helping advocate, it's helping media investigate things that the agencies, even if the agencies are not, it's helping oversight entities look at things, trends in agencies. So I think I was just suggesting the survey because that's one way to solicit information from agencies. I'm happy to do something less formal. I don't feel like it needs to be like know what's going on in all agencies. It's like, here's 3 examples from agency. Here's, just to give like a sense to the public, to lawmakers, to folks who are now making bills to undermine the data collection, that this is actually being used. It's having an impact. It's meaningful. Because I think we learn that and engage at that in various ways in the work that all folks here do already. So it's more to demonstrate to other folks, I think, and also give ideas to maybe jurisdictions how they can start thinking about the data, and other folks, how they can start thinking about using the data. So that was kind of the goal that I was anticipating from having that as part of the report, which I don't know would be served from just like a report back on like 3 entities at the board meeting.
Yeah, and maybe what we can do, because I think we have a lot of that information without doing a survey, essentially. And so we do know some of the agencies that are working with, we know some agencies working with, Center for Policing Equity and doing the analysis and then taking that in, and, they can talk about what they're doing. So we know of that, as far as we know, and if you all know of other, we do know of some nonprofits, advocates, community orgs who are also using the data and what they're doing. So if you all know of others and can send us information, that's great. But we can also put together and compile what we know already from the various entities and stakeholders that we hear about in terms of, researchers. The research center knows of different research entities that are using the data, and academics, and then community organizations, as well as agencies. So I think we can probably put a lot of that together, and then if you all know of others, please let us know, and we can include that, in terms of how demonstrating that the data is useful to a variety of stakeholders, and how, and perhaps give people ideas for how else they're able to use
it. And I would just ask, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but Chief Prigden and Sharp Ayub, if when you have your association meetings, perhaps you could ask agencies if they feel that they have any good systems in place, and then refer them to us. Just because I think Melanie, to Allison's point, doing it in a more targeted way and actually focusing on people who are using the data and doing positive things seems to be a better way to focus our energy, instead of finding out like, okay, we don't really do anything, or we don't do anything that from all the other agencies.
Yeah, thank you. We can certainly do that.
Appreciate it.
Dre, I thought you also had your hand raised a moment ago. I don't know if the pass.
No, I echo DOJ staff that I think we can describe how this is being used in narrative format, just based on the information that we already have. So it was a thumbs up.
If there's no more comments on the outline, then since we had public comment, I will re-raise the motion to submit the SB2 letter. So first I want to see, are there any more comments on the outline? Great. So I guess the motion would be to send the letter as written, except for to add on point 1 is the citation to the penal code where the actual perceived language comes from, and submit it to the post commission. I actually want to amend slightly the prior suggestion and authorize, while this is going out now, would go out now, to just resend the letter during the formal notice and comment period if we don't have, if that time period doesn't align with our board meeting. Just so that we send it now, it gives the post the chance to consider it as they're creating the regulations, but then also send it during the actual formal comment period so that it's officially part of the record again. So that's the motion. Is that clear enough, Nancy? Okay. And is there a second?
I'll second.
And we do, I guess, roll call vote, Nancy, is that correct?
That's correct. And I don't know, Melanie, I know we already discussed it, but I just wanted to see if there was any additional discussion. Okay, then yes, we'll call the question. And Melanie's motion is to send the letter with the amendment to add the citation to the footnote, and also to ask to have it sent now, but also during if there's a public comment, when the public comment period is. So I will call the roll. Member Armeline.
Right, aye.
Member Kilcarney.
Aye.
Member Guerrero.
Aye.
Member Kajabi.
Aye.
Member Kennedy.
Aye.
Member Ray.
Aye.
Member Ayub.
Aye.
Member Prigden.
Aye.
Member Hawkins.
Aye.
Member Taylor.
Aye.
Member Randolph.
Aye.
Member Ochoa.
Aye.
And Member Raphael.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously with 13 ayes.
Great, thank you. And so I guess let's move into public comment again. If there's any folks, we'll start in Northern California this time. Anyone from Northern California that wishes to make an additional comment? Anyone in Central California that wishes to make a comment? And anyone in Southern California? Ava?
Again, this is Ava Bitron from ACLU of Southern California. I just very briefly wanted to say that I was thrilled to hear from DOJ that there's plans to think kind of holistically about harm that comes about from errors or harmful practices in policing, and really support that sort of lens for what the future role of this report and this space can be And these are questions that we as the ACLU have been interested in as well, and are really excited to see you all take this on, and looking forward to reading drafts. And then second, I wanted to echo the comments about the importance of highlighting how agencies have used RIPA data and how they have reacted to the reports. I think this is really crucial for understanding what the role of how this bill has been useful, not just to advocates, but to agencies themselves and to the people who make decisions and hold the power in a lot of these circumstances, and certainly understand the constraints about how to go about doing that. But I think it may be sort of prospectively, I think it's something to really think about how to operationalize, just because this information is really valuable in fighting for legislation like this one, and also just in understanding how these kind of different systems of power operate. So thank you very much for both of those points, and and for the draft of the outline of the report.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in Southern California? All right. So the last item is discussion of next steps. So one will be sending out this letter. I wanted to return to the question of the timing on the Train the Trainer curriculum. I know that was raised by a number of folks who attended the training. Is there any, I know I articulated that concern had been raised by folks. I don't know if there's any other comment that folks want to make on that, or if there's any specific next steps on that in terms of outreach that anyone thinks is appropriate to take, or if we just want to sit on, just relay that to the post.
Pastor Kennedy on here, because he indicated someone needs to talk to Post about having this delayed, that we should not be rushing to have this prepared, since it was 20 years since it's a 20-year update. So Pastor Kennedy really pushed that, and I don't know if because Post wasn't at the Museum of Tolerance, and so I don't know if anyone at the Museum of Tolerance was ever able to get in touch with Post to let them know that we're very concerned about the deadline. We want it to be extended.
Pastor Kennedy is on. I don't know if you want to comment, but there also might be someone from Post on as well. I don't know if someone from Post wants to comment, if there is any change in status since we met.
I don't know if Post has formally responded, but I'm willing to fly up and speak with Charles about it. Charles is a very reasonable man. He's a very intelligent man. And we believe that Post will give us the time that's needed. So that's what we're pushing for.
I just wanted to let you all know that I did hear the feedback from the 4 board members who attended. So I have reached out to Post. I have a meeting on Monday to address your concerns. So if there are others who feel similarly, if we have a minute, if you want to let me know so I can pass those along at that meeting as well.
Well, one of the things that major motion movies do is they have a critical viewing, and they take the time to make sure that their movies are sound, and that's all we're asking, is that we give the producers time to do the interviews, we talked about putting in definitions. We're trying to do something that really heightens the value and the honor of policing in this state. We want to produce something that hits the ball out the park. And so I think we should take the time to do that.
I'll just flag something that was also raised, is that there was a definitely desire to incorporate community by including like snippets of interviews and whatnot in the training, but there was a concern with reaching out to folks to do that without them knowing the rest of the content of the video or the training, to come across as endorsing something where they may not actually agree with how their image is being presented. So just making sure that if there is an extension of time, that there's enough time to factor in community engagement before kind of multimedia elements are created and established.
Board Member Lawanda again. Also, we were concerned about the community involvement, their voices, them being able to view and have their voices heard before it was released, that the community took part in this. And we meant all communities throughout, all throughout the state of California and different communities. And so that would need some time. So we can do that outreach to the communities to allow that before it's posted.
That's what the group did before. They actually incorporated Danny Bakewell and several other community leaders. And so they got community buy-in, which helped make that piece a groundbreaking piece 20 years ago.
Great, thank you. If I know another, in terms of other next steps, I think one is, and I can just say here to like open it up for the members of the public to submit examples of how RIPA data has been used, either through advocacy that they know, or if they know of anything in their local community, been incorporated into policies, been action items in city council, whatever, any kinds of ways in which you've seen RIPA data push the conversation and the nature of policing in your local jurisdictions, to share those. I don't know if there's a good email address that someone from DOJ could drop in the chat, or say out loud in case folks are on the phone, if they do have anything that they want to share on that. And then in terms of other next steps, Steve, am I missing anything, or anyone from DOJ? Are there any other next steps that need to be taken between now and our next subcommittee meetings?
I think that was it. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add, Nancy had provided an email that the public can email comments to, and I want to find that and put it in the chat. So I'm going to, in the event that somebody wants to communicate something in writing to the committee, so I'll find it and I'll put it in the chat right now.
Thanks. That's what I was going to say, Steve. And if there's anybody on the phone, it's ab953@doj.ca.gov. Pretty simple. ab953@doj.ca.gov.
And were there any other?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I just thought that maybe this would be a good time for me to just chime in surrounding. There have been a couple points during this meeting people have brought up, veil of darkness analyses and potential to discontinue those in this year's report or moving forward. And, I've heard from a few board members here today who have all expressed that they'd be supportive of just discontinuing that analysis as a time-saving measure. Just to provide some input, that would be a time-saving measure. Any analysis that we do is time spent not doing another analysis. So if we were to discontinue VOD or any of the other analyses, that would free up staff time and resources to be working on different analyses that may be more specific to this year's report. So, that's not to say anything specific about the method itself. I know that the board has had a ton of discussions surrounding this in past years. But I just wanted to put that out there that, if that is something the board's interested in doing for the purpose of freeing up resources that would serve that purpose, as would discontinuing any analysis. I don't want to say that it's just VOD that would free up time. However, VOD is one analysis where we do actually have to source some third-party information to get the information necessary to run that analysis. So it does have some additional buffer time on the front end for us to source that information, which is why it does add a bit more time relative to other analyses. So I just wanted to provide that input. I don't know if that's a consensus throughout the board, but it would be helpful for the department to move forward, seeing as the data collection period is ending in a couple of days here, and we'll then begin working towards processing that data and beginning working with it. So it would be helpful for us to have kind of a concrete understanding of whether or not that's something we're going to be asked to continue with this year. So I've heard from a few board members here I don't know if that's the consensus throughout the board, though.
Andrea, did you have a comment?
Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense, Kevin, given limited capacity and the need to really focus on what we've discussed. I am all for dropping the veil of darkness analysis. We've had, over the years, we've had a lot of discussion about how valuable it is or is not. You know, we put language in the report conditioning people's reading of that analysis. And I think now is a great time to use our capacity elsewhere.
I just add, just to pile on, I guess, but given also the way the pandemic has affected people's movement and commuting hours and movement in the early evening, it's not even clear to me that the data we'd be using really lends itself well to those who are interested in that kind of analysis because of the impact of the pandemic.
I think the main issue has been addressed with the RIPA data, and that is the people being pulled over just for the crime of driving black or brown, being detained, being consent searched. You almost know you can't say no. Can't quote the law because you don't have the gun, the officer has the gun, and you want to survive the stop. And so understanding that the outcry of the community has been supported by the data, and we are trying to put some things in place with the updated racial profiling curriculum to directly address the outcries of the community. So I agree with that. We have collected data. Now it's time to do something with the data we have to address these issues.
I would add also on the veil of darkness. It's I think in some ways it's a pretty brilliant test that is used a lot in the academic literature, and not without controversy. There's been some people have contested whether there are ways that it might be valid or invalid, and they're pretty technical debates. But it's a little bit of an abstraction in some ways, and I wonder, given that we are focusing on problems and problem solving and trying to be entrepreneurial, if the efforts of the research center are better spent on something else rather than coming up with some omnibus test of discrimination that pools all the data. And I think another issue is it seems sufficiently complex and then also easy to perhaps not implement it right, that even as a model for agencies, if they wanted to do it on their own, it might be a little bit difficult, especially for the smaller agencies that don't have a statistician on staff or a crime analyst that would know how to do something like that. And so, for that reason, I think the benchmarking, and a lot of the analysis that we do in the STOP section, it's consistent from year to year, and it's providing sets of descriptive statistics that the public can understand, that law enforcement can understand, that law enforcement management and leaders can understand. So, the veil of darkness seems like, probably that time could be better devoted elsewhere. That's just my thought.
Well, is there anyone else who wants to comment on this? Because it seems like the consensus is that it's okay. I just want to make sure that it's okay to drop this particular analysis. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Marching orders for the DOJ as they're moving forward.
Do you, normally, we don't generally have to do a vote on sort of like the direction we want to go for the board, but I'm thinking that because this was something that is very specific and something that has been in all our reports, would we maybe just do a very, very quick vote? So it's all clear that this is what the board's decision is.
Sure. Does it need to be a roll call or just
It does, just because it's on video and I can do it very quickly. If you
So
want to.
I guess if it has to be a motion, I'll go ahead and move. I move to eliminate Veil of Darkness analysis from this upcoming report. Do I have a second?
Second it.
I think Manju seconded. So go ahead, Nancy, with the roll call.
Okay. Member Armeline, Member Kulkarni,
Aye.
Member Guerrero,
Aye.
Member Kajabi,
Aye.
Member Kennedy,
Aye.
Member Ray,
Aye.
Member Ayub,
Aye.
Member Pridget.
Aye.
I get the D and the G mixed up. Member Hawkins,
Aye.
Member Taylor,
Aye.
Member Randolph,
Aye.
Member Ochoa,
Aye.
and Member Raphael. And I just went, Member Armeline, are you on the line? Okay, so we have 12.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Oh,
You're just
oh.
speaking faster than I can hit the button.
Sorry. I'm sorry, what was your vote?
Yeah, my vote was aye.
Oh, okay, sorry, I missed that. Okay, so we have 13 ayes. Again, that's a unanimous vote.
Great, thank you.
And the one that's really helpful to know at this point in time. So appreciate it.
Great. Any other further next steps before, as we go back to our subcommittee meetings and walk through some of these things? That's everything. All right, great. Unless Steve, do you have anything? We're good? Okay. All right, thank you all. We're adjourning the meeting, and I will see you next meeting.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Steve.